Where was I? This is Scorch Trials, the second book in the Maze Runner series. Just gonna chill and read, you know what I'm saying? He swam Thomas, separated from the others. Surely Jorge had to run. Surely he didn't mean to go through with the punishment. The man named Barkley, swollen but looked tough, vein muscles stretching the sleeves of his shirt. He held a nasty dagger in one hand and a big hammer in the other. "Fine," he said after a long stare down with his leader. "But if they do jump you and slit your throat, I'll get along just fine without you." "Thanks for the kind words, Romano. Now get, or we'll have double the fun in the tower." Barkley laughed, as if to salvage some dignity, then started off down the same hallway Thomas and Jorge had used. He waved his arm in a follow-me gesture, and soon every last crank was shoveling after him, except Jorge, and the pretty girl with the long brown hair. She still had her knife at Mino's neck, but the good part was that she had to be Brenda. Once the main group of flare-infected people left the room, Jorge shared an almost relieved look with Thomas. Then he subtly shook his head, as if the others might still be able to hear them. Movement from Brenda grabbed Thomas's attention. He looked to see her drop a knife away from Mino and step back, absently wiping a small trace of blood there on her pants. "I really would have killed you, you know," she said in a slightly scratchy voice, almost husky. "Charge Jorge again, and I'll sever an artery." Mino wiped at his small wound with a thumb and looked at the bright red smear. "That's one sharp knife. Makes me like you more." Newt and Friedbrand groaned simultaneously. "Looks like I'm not the only crank standing here." Brenda remembered. "You're even more gone than me," he responded. "None of us are as crazy yet," Jorge added, walking over to stand next to her. "But it won't be long. Come on. We need to get over the statue and push some food in you people. You all look like a bunch of starving zombies." Minho didn't seem to like the idea. "I think I'm just gonna waltz over to have a sit down with you psychos and let you cut my freaking fingers off." "Just shut up for once," Thomas snapped, trying to communicate something different with his eyes. "Let's go eat. I don't care what happens to your beautiful hands after that." Mino squinted in confusion, but seemed to pick up that something was off. "Whatever, let's go." Brenda stepped in front of Thomas unexpectedly, her face only a few inches from his. She had eyes so dark it made the whites seem to glow brightly. "You the leader?" Thomas shook his head. "No, it's the guy you just nipped with your knife." Brenda looked over at Mino, then back at Thomas. She grinned. "Well, then that's stupid. I know I'm on the verge of crazy, but I would have picked you. You seem like the leader type." Thanks." Thomas felt a rush of embarrassment. Then remembered Mino's tattoo. Remembered his own. How he was supposed to be killed. He scrambled to say something, to hide his sudden mood shift. "I would have picked you, too, instead of Jorge over there." The girl leaned forward and kissed Thomas on the cheek. "You're sweet. I really hope we don't end up killing you at least." "Alright." Jorge was already motivating everybody toward the broken doors that led outside. "Enough of this love fest, Brenda. We have a lot to talk about once we get to the stash. Come on, let's go." Brenda didn't take her eyes off of Thomas. As for him, he still felt the tingle that all shot through his entire body when she touched him with her lips. "I like you," she said. Thomas swallowed, his mind empty of comeback. Brenda's tongue touched the corner of her mouth. She grinned, and finally turned away from him and walked to the doors, slipping her knife into a pant pocket. "Let's go," she yelled without looking back. Thomas knew every single glader was staring at him, but he refused to make eye contact with any of them. Instead, he hitched up his shirt and walked forward, not caring about the slight smile on his face. Soon the others followed and stepped behind him, and the group exited the building, emerging into the white heat of the sun beating down on the broken pavement outside. Brenda led while Jorge took up the rear. Thomas had a hard time adjusting to the brightness, shielding his eyes and squinting as they walked close to the wall to stay in the shade. The other buildings and streets around him seemed to shine with unearthly luminance, as if they were made of some sort of magic stone. Brenda moved along the walls of the structure they just exited until they reached what Thomas thought must be the back. There, a set of steps disappeared in the pavement, reminding him of something in his past life, an entrance to some kind of underground train system, perhaps. She didn't hesitate. Without waiting to make sure the others were behind her, she bounced down the stairs. But Thomas noticed that the knife had repaired in her right hand, gripped tightly. And a few inches from the side of her body, a stealthy attempt at being ready to attack or defend at a moment's notice. He followed her, eager to get out of the sun, and more importantly to make it to food. His insides ached more strongly for sustenance with every step he took. In fact, he was surprised he could still move. The weakness was like a poisonous growth inside of him, replacing his vital parts with painful cancer. Darkness swallowed him eventually. Welcome and cool, Thomas followed the sound of Brenda's footsteps until they reached a small doorway through which shone a glow of orange. She went inside and made Thomas hesitated at the threshold. It was a small damp room full of boxes and cans, with a single light bulb hanging from the center of the ceiling. It looked far too cramped for any of all the other. I think there was a hair in my mouth. Far too cramped for all of them to enter. Brenda must have sensed his thoughts. You and the others can stay out there in the hallway, find a wall and sit. I'll start bringing out some tasty delights for you in a second. Thomas nodded even though she wasn't looking, and stumbled back into the hallway. He collapsed next to a wall, down a ways from the rest of the gladers, deeper into the darkness of the tunnel, and he knew for certain he'd never get back up unless he ate something. The tasty delights ended up being canned beans and some type of sausage, according to Brenda. The last words and the labels were in Spanish. They ate it cold, but it tasted like the greatest meal ever, and he devoured every bite. He'd already learned it wasn't smart to eat quickly after a long period of fasting, but he didn't care. If he threw it all up, he'd just enjoy eating all over again, hopefully a fresh batch. After Brenda passed out the food to the starving gladers, she walked over to sit by Thomas, the soft glow from the room illuminating the thin strands on the fringes of her dark hair. Hi, Bolliches. She sat down a couple of backpacks filled with more of the cans at her side. One of these is for you, she said. Thanks. Thomas had already reached the bottom half of his can, scooping out one bite after another. No one spoke down the hall from them. Only sounds were slurping and swallowing. Tastes good, she asked as she dug into her own food. Please. I'd push my own mom down the stairs to eat this stuff, if I still have a mom. He couldn't help but thinking of this dream and the brief glimpse he'd seen of her, but did his best to forget it. It was too pressing, too depressing. You get sick of it fast, Brenda said, pulling Thomas out of his head. He noticed the way she ate, her right knee pressed against his shin, and his thoughts jumped to the ridiculous idea that she'd move her leg like that on purpose. You only have about 4 or 5 options. Thomas concentrating on clearing his mind, bringing his thoughts back to the present. Where'd you get the food? How much is left? Before this area got scorched by the flares, the city had several food manufacturing plants. plus a lot of warehouses to hold the food. Sometimes I think that's why Wicked sends cranks here. They can at least tell themselves they won't starve while they slowly go crazy and kill each other. Thomas scooped out the last bit of sauce from the bottom of his can, licked his spoon clean. If there's plenty, why do you only have a few options? He had the thought that maybe they trust her too quickly. They'd be eating poison, but she was eating the same food, so his worries were probably far-fetched. Brenda pointed to the ceiling with her thumb. We've only sourced the closest ones. Some company that specialized not much. Variety. I'd kill your mother for something fresh out of a garden, a nice salad. Guess my mom doesn't have much of a chance she's ever standing between us and a grocery store. Guess not. She smiled then, though a shadow mostly hid her face. The grin still shone through, and Thomas found himself liking this girl. She'd just drawn blood from his best friend, but he liked her. Maybe in a small part of that. Does the world still have grocery stores? He asked. I mean, what's it like out there with all this flare business? Really hot with a bunch of crazy people running around? No. Well, I don't know. The sun flare killed a lot of people before they could escape to the north or south. My family lived in northern Canada. My parents were some of the first ones to make it to the camps, set up by the coalition between governments. The people who ended up forming Wicked later. Thomas stared for a second with his mouth wide open. She just revealed more to him about the state of the world in those few sentences than anything he'd ever heard since the beginning of his memory wipe. Wait a second, he said. I need to hear all this. Can you start from the beginning? Brenda shrugged. Not much to tell happened a long time ago. The sun flares were completely unexpected and unpredictable. By the time scientists tried to warn people, it was way too late. They wiped out half the planet, killed everything around the equatorial regions, changed climates everywhere. The survivors gathered, some governments combined. It wasn't too long before they discovered that the nasty virus had been unleashed from some disease control place. Called it the flare right from the beginning. Man, Thomas muttered. He looked down the hall at the other gladers, wondering if they'd ever heard any of this, but none of them seemed to be listening, all absorbed in their food. They were probably too far away anyways. When did... She shushed him, holding a hand up. Wait, she said. Something's wrong. I think we have visitors. Thomas hadn't heard anything, and the other gladers didn't seem to notice, either. But George was already at Brenda's side, whispering something in her ear. She was just moving to stand up when a crash exploded down the hallway, from the stairs they used to reach the stash. It was a horribly loud sound, the crumple and the cracking of a structure falling apart, cement breaking, metal ripping. A cloud of dust fogged its way toward them, choking off the scant light from the food room. Thomas sat and stared, paralyzed by fear. He could just see Minho and Newt and all the others running back toward the destroyed stairs, and turning down a branching hallway he hadn't noticed before. Guy's yelling at his dog over there. Where am I? Got distracted by this guy. Brenda grabbed him by the shirt and pulled him to the feet. Run, she screamed, and started dragging him away from the destruction and deeper into the underground. Thomas snapped out of his stupor and swatted at her hand, though she didn't let go. No, we have to follow my friends. Before he could finish, an entire section of the roof came crashing down onto the floor in front of him. Blocks of cement falling on top of each other with thunderous cracks. It cut him off from the direction of his friends had taken. He heard more fracturing of rock from above him, realized that he no longer had any choice or any time. Reluctantly, he turned and ran with Brenda, her hand still clutching at his shirt as they sprinted into the darkness. Thomas didn't notice his heart pounding, or have time to contemplate what could possibly have caused the explosion. All he could think about were the other gladers, now separated from him, aligned. He ran with Brenda, forced to exhaust his life to her completely, and trust. Here, she yelled. They made a sharp turn to the right. He almost stumbled and fell, but she helped him stay on his feet. Once he had a good pace, she finally let go of his shirt. stick close to me. The sounds of destruction behind them faded as they ran down this new path, and panic lit up Thomas inside. What about my friends? What if? Just keep going. Better for everyone to split up anyways. The air cooled as they moved further down the hallway. The darkness deepened. Thomas felt his strength slowly returning. He caught his breath quickly. Behind them, the noises had almost stopped. He worried about the Glazers, but instinct told him it was okay to stay with Brenda, that his friends would be able to fend for themselves if they'd gotten out. But what if some of them had been captured by whoever set off the explosion, or killed? Who had attacked them? Concern seemed to bleed his heart dry as they ran along. Brenda took 3 more turns. Thomas had no idea how she could tell where she was going. He was just about to ask when she stopped putting a hand to his chest to hold him back. "You hear anything?" she said, through huffs. Thomas listened, but all he heard was her own breathing. Everything else was silence and darkness. "No," he told her. "Where are we?" A bunch of tunnels and secret passages connect the buildings on the side of the town, maybe across the whole city. We haven't explored that far yet. They call it the underneath. Thomas could see her face, but she was close enough that he felt and smelt her breath. It didn't reek, which surprised him, considering her living conditions. It kind of had a non-scent, somehow pleasant. "The underneath," he repeated. "Sounds stupid." "Well, I didn't name it. How much of it have you explored?" He didn't like the idea of running around down there without knowing what was ahead. "Not much. We usually run into cranks, the really bad ones. We pass gone." This made Thomas turn in a circle, searching the darkness for he didn't know what. His whole body tensed with fear as if he just jumped in the ice water. "Well, are we safe? What happened with that explosion anyways? Did he go back and find my friends? What about Jorge, huh? Shouldn't we go find Jorge too?" Thomas hadn't meant to offend her. "Yeah, Jorge, my friends. All those shanks. We can't leave them behind." "What's a shank?" "Never mind. Just what do you think happened back there?" She sighed and stepped forward, closer to him, pressing her chest against his. He felt her lips brush against his ear as she spoke. "I want you to promise me something." She said it softly, and barely more than a whisper. Chills broke out all over Thomas's body. What?" She didn't pull back. She kept speaking into his ear. "No matter what happens, even if we have to go alone, you'll take me all the way back, all the way to Wiccan, to that cure you promised Jorge. Tell me all about in the storage room. I can't stay here and slowly go insane. I can't do it. I'd rather die." She grabbed both of his hands and squeezed. Then she rested her head on his shoulder. Her nose nestled against his neck. She had to be standing on the tips of her toes. Each breath from her sent a new wave of chills across his skin. Thomas was enjoying her being so close, but it seemed so bizarre and out of the blue that he had a surge of guilt thinking of Teresa. All this was stupid. He was in the middle of a brutal and worthless attempt to make it across a wasteland. His life is on the line. His friends may be dead. Teresa could even be dead. To sit here and cuddle with some strange girl in the dark was about the most absurd thing he could think of. "Hey," he said. He wiggled his hands from her grip and grabbed her upper arms, pushed her away. He still couldn't see anything, but he imagined her there looking at him. "Don't you think we need to figure things out?" "You still haven't promised me," she replied. Thomas wanted to scream. Couldn't believe how strange she was acting. "Fine, I promise. Did Jorge tell you everything?" "Mostly, I think. Though I'd already guessed in the second he told our group to go on without us, meet us at the tower. Guess what? That we were going to help you get to the city in exchange for you taking us back to civilization." This made Thomas worry. If he came up with that so quickly, don't you think of your friends did too? "Exactly. What do you mean exactly?" "Sounds like you figured something out." She reached out and placed her thumb on his chest. "I think that's what happened. At first I was worried a group of longer gone cranks, but since no one chased us, I think Barkley and a couple of his buddies rigged an explosion at the underneath entrance, tried to kill us. They know they can get plenty of food somewhere else, and there are other ways to get down here." Thomas didn't understand why she was being so touchy with him. It doesn't make sense. I mean, kill us? Wouldn't they want us to use us too? Come with us? No. Barkley and the others are happy here. I think they're a little more gone than we are, starting to lose their rational sides. I doubt the idea even occurred to them. I bet they just thought they were all going to gang up, eliminate them. That we were making plans down here. Thomas let go of her, leaned his head back against the wall. She pressed in again and wrapped her arms around his middle. Brenda, he asked. Something where I wasn't right with this girl. Yeah, she mumbled against his chest. What are you doing? What do you mean? Don't you think it's a little weird how you're acting? She laughed. Such an unexpected sound that Thomas thought for a second she'd succumb to the flare, become a full-blown crank or something. She pulled away from him, still chuckling. What? He asked. Nothing. She shed through a schoolgirl snicker. Guess we came from different places, that's all. Sorry. What do you mean? He suddenly found himself wishing she'd hug him again. Don't worry about it, she said, her merriment at his expense finally subsiding. Sorry for being so forward. It's just pretty normal where I come from. Oh, it's okay. I mean, I'm good. He was glad she couldn't see his face, because it must have burned so red she started laughing all over again. He thought of Teresa then. He thought of Mina and the others. He had to take control, now. Look, you said it yourself, he said, trying to pump confidence into his voice. No one chased us. We need to go back. Are you sure? She had a suspicious tone. What do you mean? I could get you through the city, find enough food to take us with. Why don't we leave all of them? Make it to the safe haven place on our own. Thomas wasn't going to have this conversation. If you won't come back with me, fine, but I'm going. He put his hands against the wall to guide himself and started walking in the direction from which they'd fled. Wait, she called out, and caught up with him. She grabbed his hand and intertwined their fingers, now walking alongside him, hand in hand like lovers. I'm sorry, really, I just think it would be easier to make it through with fewer people. I'm not really great friends with any of those cranks, not like you and your gladers. Had he said that word around her, he didn't remember, but anybody could have at some point without him noticing. I really think as many of us as possible need to make it to the safe haven. Even if we do get past the city, who knows what'll be next? Maybe then we'll really need numbers. He thought about what he just said. Did he really only care about having numbers? In the end, so they'd have a better chance to be safe. Was he really that detached? Okay, was all she said in response. Something had changed in her. She seemed less confident, less in charge. Thomas took his hands from her grip, coughing into it as an excuse. He didn't reach out again for her when he finished. They didn't talk for the first few minutes. He followed her, sensing her even though he couldn't see her. After several turns, a light appeared up ahead, brightening quickly as they approached. It turned out to be sunlight, pouring down from the jagged holes in the roof. The aftermath of the explosion, massive chunks of rocks and twisted pieces of metal. Broken pipes blocked the way to where their stairs had been, and it looked like climbing over the wreckage would be dangerous. A haze of dust clouded everything, making the rays of sunshine appear thick and alive. Motes dancing like gnats, the air smelled of plaster and something burnt. They were also blocked from the stash room with all that food, but Brenda found 2 backpacks she brought earlier. Doesn't look like anybody's here, she said. They didn't come back. Jorge and your friends must have gone back up and outside somehow. Thomas didn't really know what he'd been hoping to find, but at least one piece of good news was obvious. No bodies though, right? No one died in the explosion. Brenda shrugged. Cranks could have dragged their bodies off, but I doubt it. No point. Thomas nodded as if solidifying her statement, holding on to it. He had no idea what to do next. Did they just go through the tunnels, the underneath, searching for the other gladers? Did they just go out into the streets, back to the building where they ditched Barkley and the others? Every idea sounded horrible. He looked around. as if the answer would magically present itself. "We have to go through the underneath," Brenda announced after a long moment. She'd probably been contemplating their options just like Thomas. If the others went up top, then they'll be long gone by now. Plus, they'll pull any attention toward themselves and away from us. "And if they're down here, we'll find them, right?" Thomas asked. "These tunnels all come back together eventually, right?" "Right. Either way, I know Jorge will have them moving toward the other side of the city, toward the mountains. We just have to make it there so we can meet up and keep going." Thomas looked at Brenda, thinking, maybe only pretending to think, because he really had no option than to stick with her. She was probably his best, maybe only, bet of accomplishing anything other than a quick and horrible death at the hands of a long-gone crank. What else could he do? "Okay," he said. "Let's go." She saw it, she smiled, a sweet smile that shone through the grin on her face, and Thomas unexpectedly longed for a moment they'd had in the darkness together. Almost as quickly as his thoughts formed, though, it was gone. Brenda handed him one of the backpacks, then reached into hers, pulled out a flashlight, clicked it on. The beam shot through the dust as she shone it this way and that, finally aiming it down the long tunnel they'd already been down twice. "Shall we?" she asked. "We shall," Thomas muttered. He still felt sick about his friends, and he wondered if he was doing the right thing sticking with Brenda. But when she started walking, he followed.